Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today in paid ads saying in-house versus external partnerships. So this is being recorded. I'll send an email with the rewatch link once the event is over. And if you have any additional question, there's a chat. Don't feel free to drop a question and we'll get to you.
Yeah, thanks, Grace. So let's do some quick introductions here, and then we'll dive into some more specifics, and so you can learn more about me and the panelists. So really quickly, my background in previous life was helping lead growth for different companies, both full-time and as a consultant. Spent 11 years in San Francisco. I moved to New York about 3 years ago, and started an executive recruiting firm, specifically focused on hiring senior leaders within growth, and I put growth under 4 buckets: marketing, product, analytics, and design. Most of our clients are somewhere in the consumer space, a lot of D2C, a lot of e-comm, a lot of mobile apps, a lot of fintech.
Cool. Hey guys, I'm Andrew. I spent about a decade in digital marketing. Most recently, I co-founded and ran Agency Within, grew it to be the largest independent digital marketing agency in the US. Worked with a lot of startups as well as enterprise brands like Nike, Shake Shack, Rothy's, Goop, and had a successful exit in 2018. And since then, I've been doing for the past 2-3 years, really focused on early stage investing, advising, a little bit of consulting as well in 3 core areas: in direct to consumer, in ad tech, and in next gen commerce.
Hey everyone, I'm Sib. I'm one of the co-founders of Branch. We sell premium office furniture for less. We actually started out focused on companies. The pandemic changed our plans a bit, and now we sell to many folks in home offices, like I assume many of you are today. So it's been a fun adventure. I would say I'm probably one of the newer folks on the panel to direct-to-consumer marketing, but we've had to pick things up pretty fast. So hopefully can offer some perspective from that side of things. And before that, I worked in venture, and I spent some time at Redfin, the real estate tech company, where I did corp dev and partnerships.
Hey, I'm Steph, the founder of Cadence. Cadence is building next generation refillable containers for your portable personal care products. You can think of us as a sustainable Muji. Our mission is to eliminate single-use travel-size containers. And before Cadence, I was a head editor over at Big Up Productions. So my main mission was to lead the creative and execution charge for outdoor media pieces for Red Bull, Patagonia, the North Face, and our own international film tours.
All right, hey guys. So my name is Mike Schombacher. I was most recently head of growth at Hawthorne. Actually, just left. But before that, I led growth at Quip, and before that was at the New York Times, leading paid search and paid social after working in the agency world. So I've been around at all sorts of different companies, big, small, in-house agency, and whatnot.
Cool. So all of you who RSVP'd for this event, put your questions in when you RSVP'd, and we pulled out, I believe, somewhere around 8 to 10 of the questions that we felt were most interesting and relevant for this audience. So we're just going to go through them and have our panelists kind of give their thoughts. So the first one: how are you thinking this year about sticking with paid ad vendors you've already worked with versus new partners? Yeah, what's kind of the go and no go to understand, okay, is the partner you're working with, whether it's an agency, whether it's a consultant, whether you feel like you're getting the right experience, or whether it's time to start a new RFP or start a new process?
Yeah, I'll kick it off there. I think I've actually seen like a lot of adoption of new vendors, whether they're tools or whether they're agencies or partners. The obviously everyone's kind of gotten used to working over Zoom, but I think it's been a lot of times a good thing or a clarifying thing in terms of being able to have and set up those meetings instead of having a tool or you know, a partner come in and take, you know, 2 hours to run you through like their process and everything, you know, and the travel time as well. You know, you could do a lot more of those and do them a little bit more efficiently. And it removes some of the, like, you know, on the investing side too, but in this space, like a little bit of the fluff, and you can kind of get down to the, you know, the actual the meat of it a little bit more quickly, which I found has enabled people to kind of get RFPs done more quickly and actually go through the process. That said, like, it definitely, in terms of opting into new tools, it's definitely a little bit more reliant on like network and referrals and people who you kind of trust to come into your, because you don't have that face-to-face element.
Yeah,
Makes a lot of sense.
I can say with that as well. Like, I think it's definitely. I mean, I've worked, like I said, in-house and agency side, and there's obviously benefits to both at like different points in company life cycles. I think right now, one area that like agencies are bringing some more value than they would in a lot of other times is just this last year has shown how rapidly like markets are changing and consumer behavior is changing and everything's changing, and agencies just have a lot more insight into how that's going across the board. For example, the great Facebook, whatever the hell happened in like July, August, that completely changed there. Like, working with an agency, when I was at Hawthorne, brought on an agency at some point during that, and it allowed us to get an understanding of, okay, like, is this just us? Is this happening to other people? What are the trends? Like, what type of strategies on Facebook are working now than they weren't before, and things of that nature. So that's just one example, but that was definitely beneficial to us to understand, like, are we doing something wrong right now? Are we doing something right now? Or are these just trends that you're seeing across the board?
Makes a lot of sense. And I think a lot of the founders we chat with, and I wouldn't say there's anything particular about this year, but one of the reasons they sort of think about kind of reevaluate whether they're excited about their paid advertising vendors or not is sort of a level of communication and strategy. I think more than ever, people are leaning on their agencies to not just execute campaigns, and I think a lot of founders feel like they're coming up short when they want bigger picture ideas, you know, new channels, new optimization ideas, strategic input, and so I think that's become a go and no go as well. But I'm seeing a lot more founders being comfortable with landing on agencies a lot earlier in their life cycle than I've been used to in the past. I think particularly with so many D2C companies popping up and getting funding and paid advertising being so integral to a lot of D2C companies, they're leaning on kind of vendors earlier on. And if they're not getting that strategic input, they might kind of look around. But I think partners and vendors are being a much deeper portion of companies than they maybe historically were.
Yeah, something that we do, Nick Sharma is one of our advisors, and he's on our calls every week. And so this helps us constantly reevaluate what the best option is for us in the moment, and then what will be the best option for us 3 to 6 months down the line. So it's always nice having that kind of second mind there, who's also working with so many other brands, seeing what they're doing, brands in a similar space and similar stage as us. So that, for me, has been a huge advantage in kind of evaluating, you know, what is best for Cadence 2.0 and in this next year.
Yeah, it's great. It seems like a lot of people have enjoyed the ability for their agencies to kind of circle back and say, hey, you know, we see what's going on with you. Here's your metrics. Here's your optimization ideas, whatnot. But here's what's going on with these 5 to 10 other brands that have some level of similarity, maybe play in your industry or at the same sort of like life stage curve of you. Maybe you should look at a little bit of what they're doing, and we can show you a little bit of what they're doing, and kind of you can incorporate that into some of your campaigns and your strategy. So yeah, that's definitely a big advantage of being able to work with an agency who can share that level of knowledge.
With that said, you do get a fair amount of context just from like growth Twitter. I think one kind of tangible heuristic I'd use is like if your agency or if your consultant's telling you things like, you know, integrating CAPI and getting ahead of the server side tracking stuff, and if you're hearing that from them first as opposed to from Twitter, then they're on the ball, they're communicating properly, and they're really adding some value, at least in terms of the speed of iteration. But I would say, like, I would just say that I have found, and maybe it's just Andrew's Twitter that I'm indexing on, but I found that you can get a lot of that context from just the the online masses if you curate your feed right. But to the extent that your team is getting you ahead of those things and being proactive, I think that's a really great signal.
Go
Are you
follow
showing up?
me at Irrvrnt VC. I'm closing in on 3,000 followers.
It's great. I recommend it.
I love that. Are you showing up to your agency meetings with like screenshots from Twitter and being like, why are you not on top of this?
He actually just follows Andrew at this point. No, our paid consultant is fantastic. He has he's exactly what I said. Like, he's always ahead of it. He's communicating really well, and typically we are hearing things from him a week or two in advance through his agency contacts, who are probably hearing about it from their Facebook reps and what have you. So he's definitely keeping us abreast of all the things that have been happening. Yeah, from that summer surprise through how campaign spending was affecting rates, and then all the Apple updates and that kind of stuff. We always hear about it from him first.
Yeah, one area that I think, like, I know we've been talking about like stuff like Facebook or like getting insight on more common topics. I also think that there's some benefit. It's funny because usually I'm much more on the side of in-housing, which obviously shows that it ebbs and flows. But like, for example, if you're trying to launch some channels like affiliate, especially as you're growing a company and you're on the smaller side, like, it makes sense, I think, in my opinion, to like dip your toe in the water with some of these expert agencies, rather than just like hiring an affiliate manager. I mean, there's some channels where you can't even really do that stuff in-house until you've started to build out and prove it out. And I think agency adds value there, especially as like people are trying to sort of diversify right now. I say right now, it's really been the last few years, but especially right now, their media mix. I think it's like depending. I mean, I've just seen a lot more success with some of these expert agencies that have sort of rolled these out before, rather than just like, it doesn't necessarily make sense to just like hire an expert in every single channel as you increase your mix.
Yeah, no, I love that. I love that point right there. And I don't think you should really even be, and this goes against our agency because we of course get paid by companies looking to hire in-house. But like, I don't think you should hire in-house until you either have kind of tested a channel that you think is going to work and seen some level of results for it, and then hire someone to own it and scale it. Unless you just have incredible conviction that certain channels are going to work because you've seen other companies that are similar to you make them work. But for the most part, I like the idea of having either a consultant or an agency or someone part-time come in and prove something out for a few weeks or months, because that would really suck for you to hire an affiliate manager and then realize 6 months down the road, oh wait, affiliates didn't really work. So what are we going to do with you now? So yeah, no, I really like that point.
I don't know if this is preempting some of the other topics we're going to discuss, but yeah, just to expand on that, I think our strategy, and we really started at ground zero, right? We basically had to spin up our D2C business from scratch when our enterprise business completely blew up in March. And so our sort of game plan, which seems to have worked so far, is we have one or two really outstanding generalists on the team. And basically they take care of some of the initial thesis testing, like affiliate. Funny you should mention, Mike, it's been fantastic for us as a channel. And so, we had this guy internally who obviously knows our brand, knows our story better than anyone else, can get up to speed faster, and can just translate his institutional knowledge into really effective pitches to editorial and affiliate context. And so he tested the thesis. And then I think it's almost like an inverted curve. You start internal, and then you go to maybe agency to begin to scale it out a little bit more. And then when it's really getting to scale, you maybe bring it back in-house, now that you have some sense of what it can do for you and you want to retain your efficiency in scaling that channel. So that's one formula that's seemed to have worked for us for a couple channels.
You nailed the curve that I see with every single company. They all do. That's exactly the live stage that they all go through. And then they exit or go public, and then literally everything runs through like ginormous agencies. And they have like 30-person teams at an agency, and there's the people internally only do strategy. So yeah, it's really funny how everyone kind of hits the same kind of path.
There was that trend that like happened like a few years ago when everything was like in-house agencies. You remember that? Like, it was like 2 years ago when like every big company was like, we need to build an agency in-house. You remember that?
Yeah. I think like the Airbnbs, Uber did that. Uber basically, I mean, I'm sure
Smile Direct
maybe-
is a 125 person like in-house agency, and they're the only company I've seen it like work really, really well for. They basically are like a marketing agency with like a product attached to it in some ways.
Who is that?
Smile Direct.
Oh yeah, they spend. I think they were one of the top 10 spenders online, right?
Mhm.
And going back to the earlier question, really quick, you know, I would say like maybe 3-4 years ago, maybe even longer, certain agencies might be had interesting tech that might have gone along with like that kind of ad support. I don't know, like the whole kind of mix of tech and services. It seems like that's dying down now that like Facebook, Google, they've introduced tech that is just as good or better than like the Kenshoes of the past who really tried to upsell the tech plus the services. But like, you know, is there anything else coming out with agencies that is unique in terms of maybe one agency has this that another other agency doesn't? Or really is it just like all services right now? I mean, obviously there's like the Smartleys of the world who have a little bit of that machine learning, and like some companies claim to have like special landing page tech, whether they do or don't. But has anyone seen anything that, because the last question kind of pointed to an idea of like, okay, looking like for a reason to look around at other agencies or vendors, and maybe if someone has something a little bit more unique in their offering beyond just like, hey, we are a collection of a bunch of fucking media buyers. We're a collection of a bunch of fucking media buyers. You know, like, has anyone brought anything to the table that you've seen?
I think in some of the emerging channels like podcast, you see it. And I think, I mean, at the end of the day, like for things like podcast or offline or like things like that or TV, like what they bring is relationships and bulk buying and better rates, which is really useful. Like that's super useful. So I don't want to diminish it, but that's the big thing. But I'm starting to see, like, I think in the audio space, you start to see Veritone sticks out a little bit to me, that they bring a little bit more tech. Like you're seeing that like the like podcasting space right now is like cookies are starting to get introduced and pixels are starting to get introduced for the first time, and that sort of value is there. So I think when you're talking about like social, maybe it's a little bit different on the tech side, but I think on some channels it's there.
Cool. Makes a lot of sense. Great. Next question. What are some of your best practices for testing content? And I think is really relevant for all the people on this call right now, because I think all of your products are so emotional to the user, or the products maybe you were working at previously. So like, what is your process for that?
I'll jump in. So I think content to me is like kind of a few different channels, right? So whether it's like landing page content or ad content, I think with ad content, we're starting to see a lot of like less is more, both from like a Facebook point of view, which I don't always agree with, like in terms of their top down messaging to advertisers, but also seeing a lot more tools that are helping you to actually analyze the performance of the creative, whether it's tools like I've seen a proliferation of them, but there's Magic X, there's Marpipe, there's Try Pencil, there's every day by Jove. I just saw an Instagram ad for earlier today. I guess they have me in the right audience bucket. So there's a lot of tools that are going and trying to help you analyze the performance of the ads and what's working, what's not. And I think that's really one piece of the pie, and that's really critical. I mean, I'm partial to Marpipe personally, but a lot of the other tools do a lot of great stuff. And then the other aspect is like a balance of like also being able to create enough content to test, right? And it's not just about, hey, like we're going to test the blue button versus the orange button, right? Like, yes, that can move the needle, but like what really moves the needle is, hey, we're going to test emotional imagery, or we're going to test a cartoon versus a person, and we're going to test product versus lifestyle, like some of those bigger changes. So figuring out ways that you can leverage some of these tools or other tools to take your assets, multiply them, and get enough to test, and then have the right kind of tools at the back end to analyze what's performing and what's not.
One thing that's always, I'm interested to hear other people's take on this, that's been coming up for me, right, is there's somewhat of a cost to like test like A/B testing perfectly, especially on some of these platforms that auto optimize, which is becoming more and more and more of them. Like, how do you guys address, Andrew, interested from your perspective, because you brought up testing like creative concepts against each other. Do you like tend to allow Facebook or Snapchat or whoever to sort that out themselves? Or if you're working in display using some sort of optimization tool, or do you try to set up like traditional A/B tests on that side?
Yeah, I mean, Facebook and Snapchat and all of them are really good if you set up the campaigns properly at driving the spend to the better performers. Again, you know, I'm biased because I have a relationship with Marpipe, small investor there, but you know, I've been using it and really love it. What they do is they actually take your different assets and they can permutate different. You know, you build a template, 5 different images, 4 different text overlays, just to keep it really simple, and you have 20 different assets. They'll actually go out and put and launch the test directly from their platform into Facebook, put the same amount of spend behind each one, and then analyze that in a multivariate way. So it's not A, B, C, D test, but it's like, hey, when you use this text, it overperforms by this amount. When you use this image, it overperforms by this amount. When you put those two together and these two together, this is how it performs. But yeah, I mean, like it's really you know, one of the reasons I love Marpipe or any of these other tools are starting to do it also, but is it's one of the hardest things. The reason, you know, agency within my former agency, the reason we grew so quickly and were so successful, a big part of it was really focusing on data and really being analytical. It's extraordinarily hard to do that with creative because the data is so unstructured. So you need a process to structure the data, and these tools help you with that. And so I think that's like a critical element of like making sure that like Facebook can over optimize sometimes to one thing versus another. And especially as you're trying to introduce new creative and trying to beat the old winner, it's challenging. There's tools around that, but just making sure that you're structuring the test so that you don't go off and end up with a test result that isn't really backed by data and analysis. And that's kind of, you know, the concern without leveraging one of these tools.
Yeah, that's like one thing I've run into. It's like that last thing you said is so on point, is like oftentimes I'll find that people will want to retroactively pull insights out of like campaigns that have run that weren't set up for that learning. So like in terms of like what are some of your best practices for testing content, it's defining exactly what you want to learn before you're doing it. And like sometimes that means like going to the creative team, because oftentimes these creative teams have ideas, right? And they're like, oh, well, and you'll run a campaign and then afterwards they'll be like, oh, well, did we learn this? And so I think a big part of it has to be like planning with them and getting them all involved about like what you need to test, what you want to learn beforehand so that you can learn that afterwards. Because I've been on teams where it's like they have these meetings with creative and growth, right? And they just sit there and they just go through all this freaking data that creative doesn't understand. And like you really don't get any insights out of, where it could be just like an email that sends out the result of a test. And creative people love that because it verifies what they're doing.
Totally. Yeah, I think categorical testing plans are really important. Not just taking, here are 5 different images, pieces of content, whatever that we really like. Let's test them against each other, and then whichever has the highest performance, you know, roll it out to a wider audience. I think that's just it's very short-term thinking. You're only just basically putting all that work in to get a slightly bigger bump in open rates, instead of learning, does my audience respond to fear-based messaging? Does my audience respond to looking at humans? Does my audience respond to looking at my product? Does my audience respond to press pieces? You know, like the bigger picture one. And then you can really say, okay, press pieces do so much better than like attractive models holding my product. That's a whole category right there. And you can knock out attractive models and then just go deeper into like, okay, press pieces. And then it strategically makes you think, let me go after some press, because people really dig that. And like, there's a very large robo-advisor who ran robo-advisor. It's not even startup anymore. It's very large, but who basically ran tests to understand what actually converts. And like, what they learned was, you know, getting people to press pieces and then cooking them along the way performed way better than getting people to their own blog posts but that was number 2. And then number 3 was like a direct CTA of, hey, start with our product, our robo-advisor product right now. So they knew, all right, we got to go hard on press and then circle it back to these ads. But if you're not testing categorically, you're not going to think about that on a bigger picture basis. And actually, before this call, the panelists here were all talking. And I think one of the ads that really stood out to me was the one that Steph was running which just really shows like how cool the product is. And like never in my life did I think I ever wanted or needed like her product. But like, so not only thinking about content as far as like bigger picture, this performs better than this, but like, how did you even get to that piece of content? You know, like what was the process and the learnings of like your customers and your research that led to like showing this particular kind of like, I wouldn't call it a video, but like kind of action with your product?
Yeah, I would love to say that we tested everything methodically. We're being in year 1 of our startup. The process was testing to some extent exactly what you were saying. You know, we were really leaning on the aesthetic. Is it just the visual of how beautiful the product is on your nightstand? And then Nick Sharma, who we work with, who I mentioned earlier, really brought to the table, this is really working for brands that are similar to yours. And we did that, us versus them side by side. And it was incredible. It took, our ROAS went from, 3 to 7, and that is, our best performing ad and continues to be. And so now that we're a little bit bigger, we can do things more strategically. But doing that was one of the best, tests we've ever run and worked so well for us. And we're lucky that we're solving a really distinct pain point. And so to figure that out early on was huge for us. And I know you asked earlier, how has Cadence been during COVID? And figuring that out was such a turnkey moment for us. And it's why we've, one of the reasons why we've managed to do quite well during a time when obviously travel and daily commuting has been cut by 75%, because it connects to something that, remains a constant no matter if people are at home with their vitamins on their desk. And it's just a problem they really need solved. So I appreciate you checking that out earlier.
Yeah, everyone go to Cadence, the website, and then you'll start getting retargeted with her ads, and then you'll start to know what I'm talking about. Very cool. Thanks for that. And what was that tip? What was that tip on content that, oh, hey, these brands other brands are doing it and it's performing well? What are the details around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the biggest strategies we've also used on the content side, and we do all content in-house, is bringing on interns. And then that has been able to allow us to test things so quickly. So that is one of the best things that we did early on, and allowed us to really grow and test at the speed that we needed to.
Cool. Thanks for that. We'll jump to the next one, Grace. So for the next one. Oh, this is a good one. How long should it take to onboard a new agency? And how do you properly onboard a new agency to set them up and you for success?
My answer when I first saw this was longer than however much they want it to take in-house. It's always going to take longer to onboard an agency than a company wants. That's something I've noticed on the agency side, like right away. We would always tell people this is going to be like really like, say, like, depending on what we're doing for the client, like this will be a 2-month onboarding process, a 3-month onboarding process. It depends really on what you're specifically doing. And I think it's important for agencies to like manage expectations of like how quickly performance will be. Like, for example, if you were to onboard a Facebook agency right now, you need to get them up to speed on like everything you've been doing, what you've been testing. They need to audit your account. They need to take over. You need to set up processes. Like these are things that people don't think about, even ignoring how long it takes to get contracts signed. So I think, I mean, like I would never try to get an agency like up and running unless like the most extreme, even if you're pushing it less than a month from the time contract is signed to be like fully operational, usually like 2 to 3 months, depending on what type of work they're doing for you. But that's my take on it.
That's fascinating, because I always thought of an agency as like turnkey, like that's part of the value. You don't need to like train, onboard, grow, manage their careers, create like a performance plan for them. It's like run ads tomorrow. But that's fascinating.
Well, I think a lot of it too is like, for example, like what Andrew was just talking about, right? Like testing concepts, like coming up with the concepts, getting an understanding of what they do. Like, what's the testing plan? Like, yeah, sure, that a Facebook agency could come on and start managing my Facebook account tomorrow, but what value does that provide over what we were already doing, right?
Makes a lot of sense. Cool.
We've only ever worked with, I don't think we've worked with like a proper, like a W Promote or like a big agency. We work with plenty of consultants, and I actually find that like many of them are, some of them that we didn't end up working with full time, like they're ready to go, like they're ready to go, and they just want to make it turnkey. And we're like, whoa, like let's slow down. Like, why don't we talk about the brand a little bit? Like, let's get familiar with what we do, why we're doing it. Let's talk about how we've segmented and really get to know the materials you have to work with. And it's interesting. I would actually say that if an agency tries to rush you through it, then I would be skeptical. So like Mike, like if you ran an agency, I'd be like, yes, like that's exactly what I want. And I'm curious, like Andrew, like what you've seen or like how you approached it as someone, who worked with some pretty cool brands, but because we're small and we have sort of I think an evolving, distinct story that we want to make sure you convey properly. Like it's important to us to onboard. And so we spend a lot of time. I would say like an average, like before we brought on our long-term sort of paid consultant, we made sure like we had like 3 or 4 meetings, like we ran people through the brand, and a lot of folks got impatient. And to me, that's just a bad sign. Right? Like, I don't want to work with you if you're not going to fucking take the time to understand what we're doing.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I would say like, when I was at the agency and even now to help people with consulting, I onboard more quickly than 2 to 3 months, but it's also a combination of like having had several conversations with the company and with the founding team or CMO before getting going, right? Like it's not like it's a process to understand kind of where the business is at and where they're trying to go and how you can fit in there. I think also like there's different elements, right? So like like week 1, week 2, don't touch any content. Like let's use your historical brand assets that you're comfortable with, that you feel like convey your messaging, right? Then it's like, okay, right? So I'll give like a very good example there. I think it would be like I said, first few weeks, like we're not touching anything on content. Then eventually you get to a point where it's like, okay, here we have some ideas for new content, new creative, and it's very like back and forth and hey, like, this is the process we want on approvals and things like that. And then sometimes you get to the point, by month 3 where it's like, hey, like we're going to launch new assets when we're ready. We'll just launch them, as we have them, and then we'll send them to you afterwards. That way, if you have a problem or suggestion or anything, just that we can, really be going more quickly, right? So everything takes time. The same thing on like media buying, right? So like, hey, we're going to make some adjustments, and eventually it's like, you get to a point where there's like, more trust and more, less, I don't want to say less control, but like, because there's always control, but like more of that trust that's been built up in terms of that you're on the same page of what success looks like, right? Because that to me is like a lot of times where the relationships falter, whether it's on the agency side or consultant, is different expectations around what success looks like. And transparently, agencies or consultants are often incentivized for the wrong things. And it's really hard to incentivize, can't tell you how many conversations we had that were, hey, like, let's do it based on percentage of profit after this and after that. It's like, and how many of those, and I'll tell you exactly how many of those ended up actually signing a contract that had that, 0, right? Because it's impossible to do that in some ways, or I haven't found yet the structure to do it. But you can find ways to make sure that they understand what success looks like, whether it's around, hey, we're not going to trade, things that are off-brand for performance, in this regard. Like we don't want people to think, for Branch, right? Sib, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's not cheap furniture, right? We don't want to be cheap because it's not cheap. It's very well made, but it's, affordable and attainable. So like, even if cheap might perform, X better, it's long term, it's detrimental to the brand. So you want to make sure that they have that understanding and aren't going through and changing things kind of willy-nilly before you have developed that relationship.
This is a great conversation. And, it also brings up what is an agency and what is not an agency. And I think a difficulty that a lot of founders I've talked to have had is explaining to them, your agency is not your VP of growth. and they're not incentivized to be your VP of growth. My previous life was consulting, so I played that kind of like interim VP of growth role, and like it was sitting in a lot of fucking meetings. And you try to get an agency to sit in a bunch of useless meetings. Like, no, they don't want to. And at its very worst, and this is not true of all agencies, but at its very worst, when you break down an agency's profit or any service-based organization's profit, it's their basic arithmetic of billings versus effort, right? How high can you put up the billings with versus how low can you keep the costs of your effort and take home the margin of that, right? And so you're asking them to spend an extra couple weeks learning your business when they want to pump up those billings. So whether they're billing you on a monthly retainer or percentage of spend, and I think percentage of spend has a lot of flaws, but most agency owners these days really want to focus on percentage. And for the audience who doesn't understand what percentage of spend is, it's basically performance marketing agencies. The most common billing type these days is taking X% of your budget for their billing. Industry average is anywhere from 5 to 15% of your budget, depending on how large your budget is. And so they want to get to those ads quick because they want to take that 5 to 15% fast, not like sit through like a couple strategy meetings and pitch deck meetings and like stuff like that. So, but it's a mismatch at that point. At some point, when you want someone to really understand your core business before doing the work, instead of just like launch and make money.
And I would just add that, like, I think like it's also indicative, right? Like if you're trying to maximize your client LTV, right? Obviously you'd want to swing for an enduring relationship, which you would assume would be predicated on better understanding your partner, right? So I think Andrew really nailed it. Like you got to make sure the incentives are aligned in that onboarding phase, and you got to make sure that the brand fundamentals and really your objectives in general are aligned. So like, I mean, tangibly, I think, it's probably like 3 weeks to a month. It's not like a long time, but like it's enough time to do it right. And I completely agree with what Andrew said. Like they can start out with some stuff and start taking over the nuts and bolts, and then they start iterating on creative, and it can be staged. But I wouldn't hand over the keys like in a week or even in 2.
I mean, and it brings up another really big question that a lot of people have, like, how do you choose an agency? How do you know who's the right one for you? And I think, Sib, you brought up a great point that you tried to get people to actually care about the nuts and bolts of your business, and they were just like, no, let's just get started. So, I think there's a version, and this is very difficult to gauge, and there's no perfect kind of rubric on how to do this, but like, does whoever you're talking to actually give a shit about your business? Is there kind of some way that you could tell that they're taking a little bit of extra time to even Google your company, Google your competitors, find out more about your investors, like just really take a little bit of time to learn, ask the right questions before just diving in to grow a relationship with you there based off of that, and then move on, instead of just like, cool, we'll get started tomorrow. What price do you want? We'll lower the price. We'll lower the price. Just get started,
I'm just curious, like, does anyone think it's a good idea to work with like a W Promote or a Hawk Media, like as like a sort of nascent D2C brand, like at, anywhere from, whatever, like at our stage? Like, does anyone think that's a good idea? And Andrew, I know you guys got pretty big, so like maybe you're like, yes, it is. And big agencies can provide some value that small ones don't, but I'm having a hard time seeing any cases where that is more valuable.
Great question. Love that.
I feel like it's like one thing that I think gets lost when in the in-house world is that like an agency, a lot of times it's only as good as the people working on your account, right? Like that's like what it is. So like, and at the end of the day, like you're gonna have a 22-year-old or a 23-year-old in Facebook clicking these things or whatever platform they use, and like so a lot of times like what a big agency brings with them is reputation. While you're a smaller client, you might not get as much attention, but that's on like the VP of growth or the head of growth to really be putting that from the very beginning, from the time you're RFPing, sort of expectations on them. I think that like going back to that incentive model thing too, I think like the way you pay also makes a difference. I think oftentimes like that 22, 23-year-old or whoever it is that's on the account they don't work for you. They work for the agency. So if their directive from their director is you have to spend this money, make it as efficient as possible, and not just like, let's think of this different ways to spend this, or maybe we pull back, which is something that I can say when I was at Ogilvy, for example, it was never anything that was ever uttered to me. But So I think it really depends. And it's like, we skipped over that last question about relationships with agencies, but I think it also comes down to relationships. Like, do you trust them? Do you know some people that have worked with them? Things of that nature. So I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with going with a bigger agency. You just need to maintain that relationship.
Yeah.
I think to your point though, like the legibility of some of those attributes might be decreased, right? Especially if you're a smaller brand working with a big agency, like you might not have as much ability to decide on like, you know, which 22-year-old you get. Maybe one of them is going to be a star, going to be you, right? And maybe another one is going to churn and go to, you know, something else. So like I think you're exactly right on the things that matter though. What's worked for us is really just like I mean, 1-person, 2-person agencies where like it's really just people, and like, you know, the people, or they're referred to you, and you have like that real direct connection to their abilities, and a vouch. And I mean, and ideally they've worked someplace like, you know, great before. So the guy we have right now who's running our performance marketing is all those things. And I find that the personal accountability is just magnified, because as you said, like he does kind of report to us and himself. And so, you know, if his goals are to build great relationships and do right by brands sustainably, and he's aligned with those goals, then, you know, you have more direct control over how you guys work together, it seems.
Yeah. I love that. I love that.
I also just want to say to any 22, 23-year-olds on the call, I was also once a 22, 23-year-old. So, and those people probably know a lot more about optimizing media day to day than I do. So I didn't want to take a shot at them.
You all are great.
No, that's great. I mean, and like when you're thinking about a litmus of which partners to work with, I think you touched upon a lot of points of like, okay, using a W promote, which is just basically now becoming a holding company, buying up a bunch of smaller agencies. You know, I think there's 2 litmuses, and one I think is very obvious. The next is kind of controversial, but my first litmus is like, does your business actually matter to them? Are they going to really give a shit about your size of business, right? Like you're talking about your consultant, that 1 or 2-person shop, you maybe represent 30% of what those 2 people bring home on a monthly basis. So they're gonna really hopefully hustle for you. They're gonna run out of scale at some point. You know, like they can't do everything, but they're gonna care, and that's gonna drive the sweat equity to make them push a little bit harder. And when you're talking about the big agencies, you know, like I'm sure they give, you know, the level of support that's necessary and needed to the Nikes, Walmarts, et ceteras of the world, right? But to the branches and cadences, you might get 1/6 of a 23-year-old's time, you know? So how do you flip that? You know, you maybe look for someone who's really hungry for your business, and you know, they're a little wet behind the ears. And I think maybe they haven't been running an agency business for a while. And, you know, even something like any of the agencies like that we've all heard of right now, in their first year or 2 or 3, I would say the first 18 to 24 months, they had to really hustle for their clients to get a reputation, right? And they had to put all in, because that reputation was everything.
Mhm.
Then they built that reputation. Then 4 years later, they can ride that reputation. They can ride those early clients. They can ride those case studies, and the referral business starts coming in, and the leadership that really drove the hunger of making their early clients successful is now thinking about, how do I scale to 50 people? How do I set up operational frameworks? How do I hire? You know, like they're not in the ad accounts. And so I think at an early stage, you know, really search a little bit harder in finding a wide variety of companies and see how hungry you are. And that dovetails into my like second point of, I believe this, and I really feel like a lot of people disagree with me on this, and I love the disagreements because I think they're smart. But I would say founder involvement. You know, if you're talking to either an agency, no matter what they do, anything services oriented, and whoever you're talking to is 2 levels below the founder, or it's a salesperson or whatever, you know, are you really getting that agency? Are you really getting whoever made them successful? No, you're getting like, you know, the delegated person down. And I'll say, since I run a services-based business, it makes your business a little bit less scalable if you're, as the founder and CEO, you're like in all of the calls, but it also makes the people you're working with a lot happier. So like I've made active choices to not scale that fast. Number one, because I don't know how to. I've had to ask Andrew for advice on how to scale, but I'm still on every client call. I'm still on all the meetings. I'm still on every sales call. And like at the very least, the people I'm talking to know that I'm involved. But I probably would run a better business and more successful revenue-wise business if I wasn't, but it's the trade-off there.
Totally. I do. We've structured things in the same way as Sib. And I have probably recommended to our consultant, I probably recommended like 5 to 6 brands to our consultant because they've invested so much in us. They were early, we were early. So much of their success depended on us and vice versa. And so, I mean, I totally agree to your point. I mean, that, maybe slower scaling, but investment in the people, I mean, it's always going to end up coming back to you.
Yeah, it takes a while, and a lot of people don't understand that it takes a while. That kind of karma and relationship game could take a couple of years, but when it comes in, it's just it really pays off.
Yeah, and if and when you don't go and do look for those bigger agencies, I think it's important. Like like Mike said, at the end of the day, it comes down to what the team's like, but it also comes down to you can ask questions around like how many accounts are they working on, what support system do they have in place, what's the training program like, because like having gone through kind of the hyperscale and hyper growth, like we maintained a really high quality. Was it exactly the same as having me on the account? Maybe not, but was it better in some ways? Probably was better in some ways, because as we grew, we had support systems that were in place for each team that were a little bit that were that brought insights from different channels and had people that were some specialization, some generalization, and that cross collaboration and learning across different accounts and across different teams. So it's you have to find the right people, and the right people work at sometimes at different agencies, big agencies, and like I don't have any skin in the game on this, but like they are great sometimes, honestly. Like they're what you need, because you need someone who is kind of seeing everything and has more than one person sometimes, or more than 2 people to support your account as you grow and scale. And yeah, I think it's if you go through the right steps of that, a few calls, understanding how they work, what success looks like for you and what success looks like for them. One of my favorite questions to ask, before embarking on like a lot of relationships is like, hey, we're sitting here in 6 months from now, and like this didn't work out. Like, why didn't it work out? And I stole this from someone else, and I don't remember who, but I love that framing. It's like, hey, this is what works, and these are the pain points I could potentially see that like might make this not work. Like, how do we, before we go and get married or start working together, like how do we hammer out those details so that we kind of don't have those issues in the future? And like you're not gonna hindsight's 2020. You're not gonna be able to tell every potential issue that comes up along the way, right? Oh, we assigned you the best account manager, account team, and everything's great, but that person went and left and worked somewhere else. Like that happens, right? There's turnover at agencies, there's turnover among consulting shops and smaller agencies, but you can't plan for everything, but you can have some of those relationships, some of those conversations a little bit earlier to understand what that might look like.
And yeah, that's one of the agency benefits in general, right? Especially of good agencies. I always call it like the hit by a bus test. I don't know why. I think that was one of my old bosses back in the day. Like if the person that's doing this day to day gets hit by a bus, like what will put us in the best situation tomorrow? And I usually say it about myself. I'm not throwing anyone else under that bus, but like that's sort of like the litmus test for it. And if you have a good agency with a good training program, then that next man up mentality is there when it's harder in-house and harder in that agency.
We had a client where we were there for 3 growth people. So we had 3 point of contacts there. We were the institutional knowledge and institutional memory.
Was that like 6 months or?
It was over like 18 to 24 months, but yeah. Some, like someone came in, was on their way out. Someone that was there for like 12, 13 months, and then someone new came in. So,
That's always fun. One of our clients went through 3 CEOs, so that's always entertaining. Cool, Grace. Let's check out the next question. We touched upon this earlier, but it'd be great to clarify, because I think this is I think it offers a really good rubric for anyone who's trying to figure this out. But like, what stage have you normally kind of in-house versus using external partners, and vice versa, maybe switched back out? I can start a little bit there, and like, what's your rubric? Like, this is far from an exact science, but like, I think it's really helpful for founders to spend the first few $1,000s themselves, learn a little bit, learn how ads work. then use an agency to scale it out to maybe 50 to 75,000 per month. Then, gauge your agency performance, whether you're happy, whether they're adding things on the strategic side. And if you feel like you're at a good place, bring it back in house. And then once you're gigantic, and then find the W promotes of the world, and who can supplant you with a 25-person team. I don't know if anyone has any insights on from their experiences there as well.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds bang on, similar to what Sid said earlier. I mean, like, there's obviously exceptions, but yeah, that's pretty much the model, right?
Just out of curiosity, like, who here is utilizing what resources? I think Steph talked about a consultant she likes. Sid, maybe it sounds like you have a small consulting agency operation, but like, who's doing what, and what have been your learning so far?
Yeah, I can start, but we have a 3-person growth team, not including me. So we have 2 generalists, one of whom is focused mostly on acquisition, top of funnel, and so that's affiliate, that's paid before we brought on our consultant. We have another that's doing life cycle marketing, like social, email, and then our third guy, the guy I've been talking about, we brought him in from a pretty successful company you all know about. That he helped grow them to a couple $100 million. He just wanted to take a break, do his own thing. And so he's basically like a fractional head of acquisition for us. And it's been an amazing deal. Like, Andrew's met him. Andrew's actually the only guy who tells him what to do and is right. So he's been incredible. And it's worked out really well. Like, he's basically giving us the best parts of an agency and independent consultant, I would say. Like, he's got a lot of institutional knowledge. He's giving us plenty of his time. He's kind of sitting at an arm's length in some sense from our commitment perspective, but he's also involved in meetings. And to your point, he's like bridging that like interim head of acquisition consultant type role. But yeah, he gets what he wants, which is flexibility to work on his ideas while getting some interesting experience with us. We've incentivized him pretty well. Like, he gets a nice retainer plus equity in the business. So I think all the incentives are really well aligned. And he's done an amazing job for us.
I love that.
Yeah, we structure it similar to Sib. I do email, social, etc. And then we have a small agency consultant who we work with, who really scales the paid side. And then we're lucky enough to have people like Nick and Andrew who we can always source and run ideas by and make sure we're on the right track. And as we scale, we're doing the right things. So, I mean, those really, the latter is, I would say, the most invaluable to us.
There's one other like heuristic that might be helpful here, like beyond kind of the stage of the channel. There's like another thing that's like maybe like static versus dynamic. So, for example, like SEO content, like, I feel like is a pretty static ask. Like, what you need to do. It's not like, I mean, you need creativity to execute, but you don't need creativity in the strategy. I think like maybe that's, I don't know, I might be simplifying, but it's changing. But like, we have an agency, like we have someone we pay to do like our SEO content. And it's just not something that's going to be like a differentiator from our in-house team's perspective in terms of them applying their incremental time, right? But like something like like affiliate, like it's very BD heavy, it's very kind of unique to us, like it's dynamic, I would say, and maybe in the messaging, if not in the playbook. And so we insource that. We find that we've done better that way. PR even is dynamic in the sense that what is relevant and newsworthy is always changing. I know Steph has crushed it doing PR internally too. And so that's just another, I don't know, I'm curious if anyone has any thoughts on that, but that's another framework I apply. If it's a static need, if it's predictable, you can probably outsource it.
Cool. Mike, I know you've played with a lot of different models. Would love to learn your kind of thoughts there.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely get what you're saying. I think that there is also, though, a benefit to outsourcing some non-static things, because these people just have, like I said earlier, sort of like they have viewpoints into how other people are in that space. PR is definitely one of those things I've seen that sort of follows actually sort of the same trends we were talking about earlier. I think like early on definitely makes sense to do in-house with PR. It scales. You can put more effort into it as a like founder of like a starter, an earlier business. And then as you grow, I think it just makes more sense to outsource. The sort of the shine of being a new company that's interesting wears off, and you have to actually create sort of like a strategy around it that isn't just get PR. It's okay, who are we trying to reach with our PR? Why are we trying to reach them? What attitudes do we want to change about them? Where do they read? Which of these and like PR agencies that's what PR agencies do, and then they sort of have all those connections at the different publishers as well. And again, it depends on the business too, right? Like if you're doing things like B2B, it probably makes more sense to keep it in-house more. And then after a while, I think it probably makes sense to set up an in-house PR sort of function. But that doesn't even necessarily mean to stop using an agency. That's sort of my take. But I mean, it's fluid. Depends on the company. Depends on the channel, everything.
I think at the end of the day, like Mike's point earlier about people is really what it comes down to. Like you have to be flexible, and it does ebb and flow like as you grow as an agency. And like if you hire an amazing VP of growth who has a great network and wants to bring people in house, and I mean, one of the number one reasons for agency churn is the point of contact, the champion in the business changes. But like let them do that. If you feel like they're committed and going to stick with you for a few years and be able to bring in that team in, right? Because there's a lot of knowledge and there's a lot of people doing this, and like you can kind of tell, hopefully with the top 5-10% of people bring a different level of capabilities, honestly, and it's a really highly leveraged position, especially on the paid side, right? Because when you're spending millions of dollars a year, it starts to 2, 3, 5, 10% better really starts to add up and provide value. So you really do want to find the best people at the end of the day. And so that's kind of how I would think about it.
That's a great framework as well. Like we're talking about live stage, but it may just be who's the smartest, most capable person or organization that you've met, and you kind of go after both and then realize, well, I kind of wanted it in-house, but that agency blew me away in terms of their knowledge, skill set, and all of that. So give that a whirl. So that makes a lot of sense. I think we are at the end of today's session. I really want to thank everyone for joining. Thanks to the panelists